Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak about this. This is, very exciting that we have so many people here. Obviously, identity has a lot of interest, and I wish there were more people because, for me, identity is the foundation of everything that we do around digital processes. Without proper identity, without solving privacy issues, scalability, decentralizing it, moving it from the paper world to the digital world, I don't think we can advance a lot for blockchain applications or our everyday processes that can also be built on blockchain, right? So with that in mind, we actually, slightly more than a year ago, we set up, Didas association, and we're not a technology company, we're not creating technology, we are lots of passionate people, lawyers, educators, companies, startups that try to figure out, well, how can we leverage ideas from self-sovereign identity to solve some of the biggest problems facing our society and help Switzerland become one of the countries that is at the forefront of adopting it, right, for everyday processes. So I will actually build a little bit deeper on the concept that were mentioned by my predecessors. It will not be technical presentations, so I'll be skipping some technical points and we can talk about them later. Otherwise, I'll need 2 hours to really cover this. So I'll start by the actual task that we are facing today as we speak. So how many of you actually Swiss people and voting? Okay, great. So many of you actually know, right? So in Switzerland, it's quite amazing for me as a Auslander. How direct democracy works in Switzerland. Actually, every couple of months there's, on the weekend, there's big questions that Swiss people, consider and say, would they adopt some law or not, right? And it's really happening. And you have to consider that Swiss Federation has been working for a number of years to create EID law, right? And just this March, it completely shattered. And this is the, screenshot of the campaign where people were basically like, well, what are you proposing? This is some sort of log-on. You talk about passports. We don't want private companies to own our passports, and it doesn't make sense to us. Which I think had some merits in it. I think the whole education about this was wrong, but now we have to figure out the next step, right? So what are we doing? Because digital identity is actually needed. So Ministry of Justice and Federal Police, so-called FedPol, they recently published a discussion paper. It's a very, very nice paper. I recommend you to read it. They have an English version of it, where basically say, okay, what is the next step? Okay, you guys don't want login. Okay, we got the message. So what do you want, right? And they talk about different options and different levels of ambitions, right? So they say like, okay, so there's like 3 things we're considering, right? And we would like public to tell us which one is the one we need to focus on, right? And basically, first one is just a basic identity, just secure identification option, just basically, okay, just verify my name, birth date, and so on, right? The second one is, okay, can I maybe extend it with some additional government attributes? Like in Switzerland, it's very common to go and get some printout for certain registries, criminal records, or the debts you might have and things of that nature. And the third one is like, okay, can we consider ecosystem of digital proofs, right? So I collect different attributes from everybody, not from just the government, but actually from all kinds of companies, universities, doctors, and so on, and use it, right? So they're asking that question, and then they're asking like, okay, so what kind of technology we should be using? And we already talked about the fact that, identity has been evolving, and specifically, identity has been, kind of existing in real world and in online world in 2 different places. And of course, when we try to bring this world together, we have to consider where are we coming from. And essentially, when internet happened, people knew each other, right? They knew each other's IP addresses, and they created host files, right? Some of you might edit those from time to time, right? So they didn't want to type in those, IP addresses with numbers. But then it quickly became a scaling problem, right? So the DNS system was created, but the concern was not to verify who owns this thing. It's to scale, alphanumeric, human-readable monikers. pairs for IP addresses, essentially, right? As the internet became more and more successful, email came about, online applications came about, and of course corporations, they come together and created SAML, which we heard about as a SSO, federated identity. But this identity, right? What type of applications I can work with? My association with the company is owned by the company that is providing you that, or IDP in common word, that is providing you that service. Then, of course, e-commerce came along, social internet came along, Google, Meta, whatever, they providing OpenID Connect type of services, which is useful, but they know everything about you. They own all your associations, every application that you authenticate through that provider basically leaves a trace, right, and gets attributes from them. You have some sort of control, but it's not very fine-grained. You cannot move the data and so on and so forth. And finally, as an evolution of that, in 2016, there came this concept of self-sovereign identity, where the basic idea, which I'll talk about in a second, is to make sure I can collect my different attributes and can present them the way I want, and using zero-knowledge proof. For example, if I don't want people to know my exact age or tenure in the company or exact amount of my bank account, I can do that too, depending on what my business is, right? And SSI, it's very important to understand, why sometimes SSI is confusing. Actually, origins of SSI is a very philosophical idea, right? It's the idea that when I'm born into a world, right, by that very fact, I actually have rights to my identity, right? Because I'm a human being, right? I have, certain characteristics. As I grow up, I have a name, I have a place I live, and so on and so forth. And my identity, therefore, does not depend on the government to give me an identity. I have the right to my identity, right? That's the philosophical sort of idea behind self-sovereign identity. But how do you translate it into technical terms? So Christopher Allen, being one of the cryptographers who actually helped us to use TLS and was one of the authors, and today we protect a lot of communications with TLS, he sort of translated this philosophical idea into this sort of principles that are very human-centric. But the idea is, I can use attributes the way I want. I can make them parable between providers. I know exactly what's going on. I can minimize the amount of information I provide, right? Time goes by, some of you might know Sovereign Foundation. They've been and still, I think, the biggest self-sovereign identity technology, network out there. They sort of say, well, it's not just about humans, right? It's also about things. It's about legal entities, and so they sort of evolved the set of principles. They came up with this 12, which are very similar, but sort of really go a little bit more into even more, in certain cases, data privacy, but also governing identities, enabling different types of applications. Okay, so how is it happening? How does it work? Well, very, very simple. Actually, like for example, here in Switzerland, I go to a new doctor. If I've never been there, I have to take my insurance card, sometimes present it or sometimes fill out a form. It's quite annoying, and I don't know how they verify it. They just trust that you gave them the right information. So basically, the idea is and those are formal terms. Is that the issuer would be like an insurance company. You come to them, you get a credential. In certain form, you become the holder, and you use something called DID. This is a high-level presentation. I'll not talk about these details, but for those of you that know, I just create the DID, which is my global identifier that I can create just specifically for this connection, or I can have a permanent one depending on what I need. And then when I go to doctor, I package up the information about my insurance into something called presentation, and I electronically provide it to them. They can verify digital signatures using decentralized, PKI system, essentially. That's kind of how the system works technically. But, obviously the beauty of this is, my identity essentially is lots and lots of different applications that allow me to do all kinds of different things. And our friends from Findi is a Finnish network that's trying to do this. They say like, okay, you actually, as a user, right, you have all these different applications you can work with, right? So your student card, your loyalty programs, proof of vaccination, education, whatever, right? And then when you go about your business and need to combine these things, like for example, you want to apply for a job, right? They want a bunch of different things about you, right? So you need to combine these different parts of your identity and provide to them. And verifier in the self-sovereign model can decide which providers they trust, right? Which providers they trust. That's very important. And the user can decide from which source, and they will get something called proof request. They'll say, okay, this is the information I need to provide. I'll choose this and these sources, package it up, and send it out, right? So that's kind of the beauty. It's an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem. That's the important thing, right? But how do we make sure that people can actually use it, right? Zero-knowledge proofs, protocols. It's all great, and basically, right? So if you look at this, this called trust triangle, right? So you have an issuer, right? And then you use a technical protocol to provide the data to the owner or holder, right? And then I, as an owner of that data, I decide who I provide it to, and the verifier can decide if they trust the data or not. But that's the important thing. This trust relationship, right? So why do I accept that data? Why do I believe that data? And the way that works, it comes governance trust diamond. And when we talk about technology, we always forget, all these applications moving from paper world that we live today with into the digital world, technology does not replace human trust. It does not replace human factor. I mean, they have to work together. So therefore, you have to build a system whereby basically it has to be a governing authority. Maybe one day we'll learn how we can make it completely decentralized and automated. But the important thing is they publish something called governance framework, right? With this governance framework, they talk exactly about how did these identities come about, how people verify data, how they manage the data, how they manage the keys so you can trust it from a technical standpoint, things like that, right? And basically then, so if you become part of this ecosystem, the verifier trusts the governing authority, they trust into the trust framework, right? And if governing authority is certified an issuer, I implicitly trust the issuer, right? If I'm part of the same ecosystem. So this is how that actually the whole thing works, right? So it's not just the technology. And actually, Trust over IP, a fantastic organization, I recommend you kind of work with them if you're interested in this space. They sort of really spend a lot of time to think about this. It's actually work that's been pioneered by Sovereign Foundation, but then generalized for all kinds of other applications. And basically, it is two parts, right? There's governance part with layers, and then there is the technical part with layers. And then they kind of work together. Starting to build from the utility network, this is where you anchor your public keys and enable technical trust, right? And we just had a fantastic example. Yes, the centralized systems are, honeypots, and people break them, right? And with DPKI, it's much easier. That's what all this DID utility networks are all about. But you need to know who is creating these DIDs. How do you know, in internet today, if I go and open Meta, how do I know it's actually Meta? How do I know it's not Mickey Mouse Meta? I actually don't. Right? I hope that they did the work that, somebody's not pretending to be them. And I can maybe look at the certificate, and I can maybe trust that certain certificate authority did their job to verify they actually issued it to Meta, but I don't really know, right? This is where that happens. And so on and so forth, right? So you kind of build that, and in the end, these voters that are very, down-to-earth people, most of them, they just want to have things done, they can then trust the system and use it, right? So that's why you need something like that. So who are the people building this? There's, obviously interoperability is very important because we cannot build the ecosystem if the things are not interoperable, right? And some of the key organizations out there is Decentralized Identity Foundation, W3C, Trust over IP, and some of the open source projects in the Hyperledger indie space in Europe. There's lots of effort. Actually, Europe is pushing it really well with EU Wallet, but also with the European blockchain infrastructure on top of which that you build self-sovereign identity framework, right? Here I just want to say that it's also very important that we demand that these things are done in open source, right? Because we know that security doesn't work by obscurity, right? Only secure protocols are the protocols done in the open that people can look at, contribute to, and trust, right? So those are very important efforts. And finally, the interesting thing about SSI networks is you don't have to have one giant network, right? It's a competition. It's not like, Google is competing with Meta, right? Or whatever. It's actually coexistence of that network. And the reason why is because of assurance. remember we talked about governance and how, I want to publish my identity and attributes. Obviously, for government applications, there will be one set of rules and requirements. And then, of course, if we talk about, some sort of, robot community, right, in the future, there will be different set of things and different set of rules. And there will be different set of networks, right, and different governance framework. But if they can interoperate, I can go from one country to another, from another ecosystem to another, and make sure this ecosystem thrives, right? With that in mind, let me just quickly talk about Didas and what we do. I mentioned that, to me, identity is very, very important, and identity in the largest sense of the word, being able to move from paper-based processes to trusted data exchange, privacy-preserving data exchange into the completely digital processes, and, we want to make it happen in Switzerland. So Didas stands for Digital Identity Data Sovereignty Association, and DID is in there. For those of you who know the standard, it's kind of important thing for us. And what we're trying to do, we're basically trying to bring all kinds of people together to educate about SSI. A lot of people, especially non-technical people, don't understand why EID is a thing, why privacy is a thing, why it's important, what is it about SSI that makes it special. So we have to educate it, and we will be publishing some education materials here that people can really understand, right? We don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? We want to bring best practice and make sure interoperability is there. We want to grow the experts and bring them together, right? We want to promote use cases, because to build ecosystem, you need to know which proofs and attributes are there and which one you can use, so you can build those applications. And finally, obviously, there's lots of legal questions out there, other things. So we're working with lawyers and others to understand how can we change legislation or work with legislation to make the things work between the technology and legal system. We have responded to the public consultation with our paper. It's available on our blog post. It's also available through the Fed poll. It's in German, unfortunately. So it's 26 papers, 26 pages of lots of information why we think it is. The important thing is we do believe that out of this 3 level of ambitions that I talked about in the beginning, it doesn't make sense to focus on anything rather than level 3, right? Because otherwise it's like, why are we doing this? We do believe that government plays an important role, right? They will bootstrap the ecosystem by providing trusted data that they own and they can provide, and then they'll build around it. We do believe SSI is the best approach for the future. It's not PKI, it's not, another e-card or something like that, and there's lots of reasons for it. But we understand, SSI is not perfect, right? There are questions, there's been some flops, for example, in Germany, when people try to move too fast, but we have time, right? We're building for next 100, 200 years maybe, right? And so we have to use this time and work together to build and solve these problems that we can, right? So this is our position. And finally, I just want to say that, we have to again consider it's network of networks, right? So it's not either or. We don't have to build one giant network. We can just leverage, for example, evolve in parallel some industry networks, some federal networks that cantons, for example, can run, and then interoperate with our neighbors in European countries that are listed here. So yeah, so let's do it.
Thank you.